recording? Oh, I won't see.
6 weeks what?
Is that recording?
There it is.
Is it recording?
What?
Is it
Yes.
recording? Oh, then I'm not concerned. We don't need a record of my complaint.
All right, so while we're
When my cause for canonization comes up, they look at this video and be like, not her, so.
let's talk. I'm here to talk about class because
Anyway, hold down $4. Where's your brother? Is Angel your brother?
No.
Oh, where's your friend you always sit next to?
I don't know.
Can I take a picture of Adam? Yep. I would.
Pretty cool.
Just came down the walk.
Big trees.
Where's it?
Here.
Where's
No,
my
wait, go look more. Yeah.
Where's my brother? Oh, no. But I think that's me. Yeah.
Oh, that's
We're not how that is. Do you guys see it something there? Oh, what is this for? What is this for? Who let you in? Who let you in? Who let you in? Who are the people?
Is it? Yeah, they get team, right?
Is he right now?
Is it the? Yeah. Town corner. I think there's.
Brandon, what are you doing?
Janet, don't make me do that again. Janet, don't make me do that again.
You know,
Sorry we left you in your house.
I mean, it's just essentially our family, it's not extended relatives like it used to be. So.
Well, I suppose I could have been using this for stuff.
Oh, are you? Yeah, actually, I would prefer that he not invite him to shoot on Sundays, but he's kind of gone back. And I'll definitely address all this.
Yeah, this is gonna
No. I know, there aren't any chairs. I should have figured it out. I got it. I know, especially you guys. These are so much more. Oscar, can you grab more?
Oh, yeah, I suppose it's gonna help, but also I'm a lady.
Is that yours? How many can you grab?
No, I don't know why when I came in, I said that must be hers, but you don't carry it first, do you?
Oh,
Oh, okay, good timing.
I was gonna say, I don't remember starting to carry ours, but.
You never know, they're pretty handy.
Yeah.
Get lots of stuff on it.
Okay, while she's doing her, you have a prayer?
No,
All
that
right,
was one
so,
of the things that I
Logan,
need
here's
to
your
know.
mission. Okay, your job. If someone kid you run by here.
beat the
I'm
crap out
gonna
of
beat
it.
the door, I get to chase it down.
They kick the soccer ball.
Did we beat the door this week, I get to chase it down.
No, but you get to find it because you can identify them. So that one, cool, I got this. Tony and I have two different styles of leadership, I think, so they're in for a child abuse moment.
We should make sure to check up front in a few minutes. Because Victoria usually is running a few minutes late, but then she gets stuck out there because nobody,
You might want to move over that too. Otherwise your head's gonna be really.
it's a nice head.
Don't tell him that, you might get a big head.
Oh, it's a perfectly average head. You should not be proud.
Kurt said this nicer, that's why it's.
I almost said something earlier, and then I was like, wait, is that thing recording? He was like, yeah, I was like, I don't know.
What's your name?
She is at home, so we have our directory photos at 7:12. We're ending class early. I mean, Kirk might be 6:12, but I'm leaving at 6:45. So this is my sister. I'm like, here's your dress. Don't put it on her until I pick her up because she's gonna put it on. It's too hot in here. My breath is so bad. But Tony, maybe this is in the next week. You what? Yeah, I hate. And I really like this right here. When you can like open windows and stuff. But it's like so hot.
Right with me.
Where's the stage? Down the hallway. There's the gym. Ours is tomorrow. So. Okay. Yeah.
It's hot. All right, hot tip for the day. Did you get started yet? Hot tip for the
I
day.
probably should go.
I get a call Sunday night from a close friend. I'll just leave it at that. And he says, and this is at 7:30, so I'm already kind of edgy, right? 8 o'clock, and I would have been grouchy. But 7:30, I'm with my wife. Kurt, yes, you have to go see this movie. So what movie? Did I tell you this? What movie? Huh? And I said, what movie? He says, I just saw this movie. You have to go see it. Now, this isn't one of those, if you don't see it, you're no longer my friend kind of things, but almost. But this is Sunday. So I asked Eileen, he told me about the movie, he described it in detail. I told Eileen about it, and I said, hey, you want to go see this movie? Tuesday night? We never go to movies, ever, like rarely. Last movie I went to was Nefarious with the men's group. Were you with us that night? So, so we went to this movie. You guys have to go see this movie. It doesn't mean we're not going to be friends if you don't, but we're not that good of friends anyway. So go see the movie. Just kidding. Go see the movie. It is called, and it's a documentary, but it's not really a documentary. It feels like a movie. It is called, and it has to do with one of our previous classes, like 2 classes ago. It is called After Death. And I'm going to hopefully show you an interview with one of the main people that was interviewed during this thing. It is amazing. You've all heard of near-death experience. Read them, whatever. I asked my confirmation class this last night, and these people don't know anything. I mean, like I asked them, who's the president of the United States? Well, I don't know, Ronald Reagan. Who? You know, I ask them anything, they have the slightest idea. I ask them, have you guys ever heard of something called near-death experiences? Boom, like this. Every one of them is watching them on YouTube and everything else. So, anyway, I showed them that video last night. And for the first time all year, I had 16 8th graders and a couple of freshmen, like they were glued to the video. And it was just talking to a dude about his experience after he died, legally died, and then came back to life. It's an amazing movie, it really is, and it's consistent with our faith, even though it's very, it's absolutely Christian, but it's not, it's more scientific than it is Christian. So anyway, you guys gotta see it. It's at, currently it is being shown at Cinemark 14 in Mishawaka. You guys know where that's at? It's the ones with the, yeah, it's the one with the reclining chairs. You can get a beer if you want, but we didn't. We just popcorn and Coke. Anyway, you can't get a beer. He got excited. I looked over here. He's like, so it really is amazing. Eileen and I talked about it the whole way home. Father Keith and I talked about it yesterday before Mass. In fact, we were late going to Mass because we were talking about it. It's just a great movie.
What's that me talking about? Corey and I watched A Man for All Seasons for my birthday.
You watched what?
A Man for All Seasons.
Oh my goodness.
I've
Charlotte
never
Guinness,
seen
isn't it?
I don't know. Paul Scofield. This one plays Thomas More.
Thomas More, right?
Yeah. I thought
You're
Judah.
right. This-
Yeah, I thought Judah was gonna hate it, right? Because it's an adult movie. That kid sat on the couch and watched the entire
Judah
thing.
watched it?
He watched the
Oh, I love
entire
that.
thing. I was so proud
I
of
love
him.
that kid.
He loved it. It was so funny. Very good movie though. Never seen it before.
You ever seen the Shack?
No, and I had the book. My mom read the book and really, really liked it. And then gave it to me, and I don't remember if I finished it or read most of it. And I was like, oh, that's good. But then by the time the movie came around, it was like years later, and then I just never Is it good? Did you like it?
What a good ending,
Yeah.
is like an extreme plot twist.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember.
I just asked one of my altar servers to watch the door. I said, I'll pay you $5 or $2 or $5, whatever, this Sunday. He says, I don't need that. It's all right, I'll watch it. No, really, I'll pay you. I don't need it. It's fine. I'll watch the door. All right, thanks. He's a good Catholic kid.
He's not gonna
Huh?
fall in the window.
Yeah, well, no, not him. He would never do that.
Okay.
All right, you're up. Oh,
All right, we'll start by praying, and this prayer is going to be about as structured as the rest of the lesson, so follow up. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
amen.
Lord, we just come before you today. We ask you that you open our hearts to what you have to reveal to us, that you quiet our minds, and help us to focus on what it is that you're saying to us as we discuss morality and the way that we can use our actions in this world to glorify you. Help us not to be defensive, not to be ashamed, but just to come before you and recognize that you have a plan for our lives, and that we can use our bodies and our actions to make you known in this world. Give us the strength to do that. Give us the clarity of mind to see what is good and the will to choose it. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Yeah, so I really will apologize in advance. This is not going to be incredibly well. It was well thought out a year ago when I wrote the notes, so there's something
It'll
coherent
be
here.
great.
It'll be, I'm just going to talk.
Never apologize.
I'm such a terrible rule of life.
I do it all the time.
All right, so if you didn't get from the prayer tonight, we're going to discuss morality and what is called the natural law. So we've talked a lot in the class so far about growing in our relationship with God and knowing who God is, and like, what do we do to help those things? How do we learn to love Him? And so much of that focuses on our thoughts and our attitudes, but also it involves our actions. That's what we're going to talk about today, because when we're talking about morality, we're talking about how we're acting in the world. What are the things we do? Like, morality is much more than just your intention, right? You have to do something for it to be a moral act. You have to act in order for it to be a moral act. So that's what we're going to talk about. I want us to start. Does anybody have their catechism with them? Somebody wants to read paragraph 1776. This will give us a good idea of what we're talking about today. And you're just going to pull it up really slowly, so he's not pulling us to read. Who's got it?
What page is it?
Well, it's paragraph 1776. Oh, Logan's got it, perfect.
Deep within his conscience, man discovers a law which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. Its voice, ever calling him to love and to do what is good and to avoid evil. It sounds in his heart at the right moment. For a man has in his heart a law inscribed by God. His conscience is man's most secret Lord and his sanctuary. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths.
So, part of what we're going to pull out of there is that our most basic moral intuition is to do the good and avoid the evil. So if we're following our right reason, this will be what we pursue. So essentially, the rational thing. If you're a human being, you're acting rationally, you're going to do the good and avoid the evil. Or at the very least, you're going to do what you think is good and avoid what you think is evil, right? We'll get into that. Because sometimes we don't always act so rationally, or things aren't so clear. But that's the basic moral principle. To do the good and avoid the evil. Everything that you've ever done, you've done because you think it's good in some way. Even when it's like you're eating an entire chocolate cake, it's like you're pursuing the good of tasting chocolate cake, right? Now, might not be the best decision, but you're not doing it because you think it's evil. It's just like the most fundamental thing that we do is pursue the good. And so if we want to take that moral precept to do the good and avoid the evil, we want to take that seriously and use that to inform our conscience and allow us to make moral actions. We have to start to understand what is good and what is evil, right? Because if you get those ideas all mixed up, you can be pursuing that moral intuition all you want, but you're going to walk down the wrong path. It's like, if you think it's good to, I don't know, hit pedestrians with your car, you might do it, right? You're perceiving a good and you're trying to chase after it, but you're obviously terribly mistaken. So it doesn't end up being moral just because you think that it's the good. So if we want to act in accord with right reason, we need to find ways not just to do the good, but to discern the good, not just to avoid the evil, but to discern what is evil. There are two ways of doing this, but they come from the same source. One source is divine revelation. One source is the natural law. If I'm not mistaken, divine revelation is what you guys will talk about next week. The Bible.
No, we don't.
No, as regards to morality. So the 10 Commandments, what the church teaches. Like, these are ways in which things that are good and things that are evil have been revealed to us.
We're talking about Ezekiel.
No.
While we're talking about divine revelation, this particular from chapter and verse, Ezekiel chapter, was it 36, verse 26, 27, well, 26 and 27. God is talking to the prophet. He says, a new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will take out of your flesh the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to observe my ordinances. So it speaks directly to what she's talking about.
Yeah, this idea that God reveals to us in an explicit way certain things that are needed, chosen, and avoided. But that's not what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about the second side of that. So remember at the very beginning of class when we said, you can know through revelation that God exists, right? The Bible, the church, what have you. You also can know through the light of natural reason. We can discern that there is a God who exists. There's somebody who created the universe. When we're talking about morality, we're the same thing. So you have the revelation of God that can help us to know what is good and evil, make moral choices. But there are also ways in which we can use our natural reason, aside from divine revelation, to discern the good and the evil. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight and then next week. When you look at the 10 Commandments and things, you'll hit on the divine revelation side. So I'm going to read, or if you guys want to turn to Romans, those of you who have your Bibles, Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. We're going to look at what the scripture even itself, because even Revelation attests to the fact that we have this natural law. This
Romans 2, what?
2, 14 and 15. That we have this capacity within our reason to discern the good and the evil. So we'll read that, and then we'll start talking about natural law, which is my J.
You got it. You're up.
For when the Gentiles who do not have the law of nature observe the prescriptions of the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the demands of the law are written in their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even defend them.
Okay, so,
Wait, I'm sorry.
okay.
That specifically, I mean, it's almost word for word as to what God promised the prophet that I just read to you. But it was what I just read to you, Ezekiel, let's say it was 1,000 years before Paul wrote to the Romans. This is the fulfillment of what Ezekiel was talking about, or God was talking about, and Ezekiel communicated to us.
And so what do we hear there, right? So it says the Gentiles who do not have the law are still able to do the law, right? So what's the law, right? It's the revelation that God gave to the Israelites. These are the things you should do. These are the things you avoid. Here's the 10 Commandments. Here's blah, 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 right? So Paul's saying, even the Gentiles who didn't have that revelation from God, they still had this law amongst themselves because it was written on their hearts. And they will be held accountable for the things that they did in accordance with that law, either to their, to being accused, right? They didn't follow what was written on their hearts, or to their defense that they did follow that law that was written on their hearts, and it's credited to them. Because sometimes I think we get this idea too that, well, we can kind of accuse ourselves by doing things that we shouldn't do, and everyone kind of knows maybe you shouldn't do that. But it works in reverse too. It's like that we can even know the good and pursue the good strictly outside of divine revelation. Again, like with knowing that God exists, it's not that divine revelation isn't important. It's not that it isn't incredibly helpful, because these things are hard to discern. But it's just that there is even within the rational capacity the ability to access these things, which is very helpful to us, because it's like everybody is in this room because we all weren't Catholic at some point, or weren't able to fully practice our faith or whatever it is. But it's like, that doesn't mean you were just up a creek for all of those years with no way to discern what is good and what's not, because God made you a rational being. And that gives you the capacity to know the good and to avoid the evil, which should give us a lot of hope. So this is what we call natural law. The idea that there is a law, a rule that we can discern through our reason. The reason it's called the natural law isn't because it's like the laws of nature. I know that can get kind of confusing, right? So it's not like, I don't know, remember those gay penguins in the zoo? And everyone's like, well, these penguins are gay, and so nature says it's fine. Like, that's not what we're talking about. Laws of nature, natural law, not the same thing. It's not like when a cold front meets a hot front, there's a tornado or something, right? The natural law means we look at the nature of a thing, so the kind of what isness of it, the essence of the thing, and then understanding the essence of that thing can tell us kind of what we should do with it. Is the action that we're doing in accordance with the essence of a thing? Does that distinction make sense? Okay. So yeah, so it's we're looking at the nature to help us understand the good and the evil. Not we're looking to nature like the birds and the trees. So natural law is going to allow us to use our reason to discern what is good. So some examples of natural law principles, and this might help make it a little bit more clear. So we're using things in accord with their nature, or we're not using things not in accordance with their nature, contrary to their nature. I'm sure I've used this example before, but eating, right? So eating is something we can understand the nature of what it is to eat something, right? It has a social kind of enjoyment element to it. It has a nutritional element to it. So it's like you make the chocolate cake and you sing happy birthday and you enjoy it with friends. And so there's a social component, and it's like, obviously you're going to eat this cake and it's going to have some sort of nutritional effect, right? It would be wrong to thwart the natural end of eating by eating the entire cake and then puking it up everywhere, because you're like, I don't want to have calories, I'm on a diet, so I'm going to just become bulimic. Like, well, why is that wrong? Because eating has a certain natural end. We can know the natural end of eating, right? It's to nourish our bodies. And we shouldn't intentionally thwart that by doing it, but twisting it up so that we can try to avoid all the consequences and not letting it kind of take its natural course, if that makes sense. So this is where I get spicy, and I link to something like birth control, and I say, right? So if you're using contraception, you're taking something, an act, a sexual act. We know what its purpose is. And if you're contracepting, what you're doing is you're taking that thing and you're thwarting its natural purpose. You're saying, I don't want the consequences of it. So maybe I want this one element that's good, the unity of the spouses or what have you. But I don't want this other element. So I'm gonna take its nature and I'm gonna drive it off the road. I'm gonna take it off course. And now what we're doing is we're thwarting its natural end. And again, it's like from reason we can see that it's not proper to use things contrary to their nature. Just like it's not proper to eat the chocolate cake and puke it up so that you, I don't know, be skinny or whatever. Same thing about like speaking, right? The purpose of speaking is to represent reality and communicate with one another, right? If you're lying and you're intentionally misrepresenting reality and you're kind of breaking communication with someone, it's like you're taking this action that we have access to, you're not using it according to its proper end. And then you end up, misrepresenting things. So this, they're not super, maybe not super elucidative, but two examples of kind of natural law principles in action. Any questions so far? Oh, no, it's good. The spicy example.
Yes. So, church is not supposed to use anything church from natural chemistry.
Yeah.
But the methods of natural chemistry, to be able to know when not the one is fertile.
Yeah.
Is that not?
Like, why is that not?
Is that not indirectly the exact same thing?
Well, so that's kind of it's a great point
Sorry.
because not just your intent, but what is the nature of a woman's body? The nature of a woman's body is to sometimes be fertile, to sometimes not be fertile. Now, certain animals, when they're not fertile, they just turn it off, man. They're not doing nothing, right? But people aren't like that. Like, we have a natural desire to join together, even outside of, there's a bunch of teenagers in the room, I have to be careful what I say. It's like, we're not like those animals that won't get it on unless they're in heat, all right? Like, we don't talk about people as being in heat, right? So it's not contrary to a woman's nature to engage in the marital act when she's not fertile. Her body's designed to accept it. It's designed to make it possible. So if you are engaging in the marital act at an infertile time, you're not doing anything contrary to what her body is set up to do. But if you're engaging in it at a time and then you're putting a roadblock in there, well, now you're kind of inserting something metaphorically or literally to thwart what that natural outcome kind of would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like you can use all the gimmicks in the world to do natural family planning, and you might set yourself up for an intention that's not super great. It's like you shouldn't even be doing natural family planning with this kind of like contraceptive mentality that like I am super in control of my fertility and it's all up to me, and that's just not good for anybody. But
the marital act is still unitive. There are two purposes, there are two reasons for the marital act. The unitive, make it unitive and procreative. So it's not exclusively procreative.
right, it's like so you're still
There's
pursuing.
kind of a
Yeah.
gray area.
And he was asking me, I was like,
You're like, I don't know. But yeah, so that's the tricky one. It's like, well, aren't you just contracepting by another means? And it's like,
That was my mindset on it. Is
Right, and it's like-
directly doing the exact same thing.
right, it might have the same effect of I don't get pregnant, but it's like very different means. In the same way that like,
Like he's saying, there's two parts. It's not
yeah, and I'm
just-
trying to think if I could think of a good example. It's like if I'm walking with someone along, this is gonna be really silly. If I'm walking with someone like along a cliff, and we're walking, and I don't know, it's windy and the wind blows and it blows the person off the cliff, like that's bad. But if it's windy and I'm like, I really have been looking for an excuse to get rid of this guy, and I just push him off, right? That means the same end, he's at the bottom of the cliff either way, right? But in one way, I've like interceded with another action, and it's like, does that kind of make sense? I mean, that, again, that's a silly example, and if I put my mind to it, I probably could think of a better one. But the point being, you're not acting contrary to the purpose of the sexual act if you have sex while someone's infertile. It's just not, it's like, because she's naturally infertile, I guess, essentially. It's not, you're not rendering the act sterile on purpose of your own accord in order to get some desired outcome. It just naturally is sterile in the moment. In the same way that like, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but like there could be a condition in which, like if a man is infertile, like he can, do his thing, but his little swimmer's not swimming, right? It's like, he's not doing something to render him that way intentionally. Could be, and it shouldn't, but, or if you've had a hysterectomy for some reason, it's, I don't know, you have your uterus taken out because you had uterine cancer or something. If you're not naturally infertile, but you're not actively like doing something to make yourself infertile.
So I'll share a story with you. We were in class, and I was one of the younger guys in class, of a class of 30 people, right? And all of our wives were in the same class. We were being taught by Deacon Fred about NFP. You're talking specifically about where are the resources within the diocese where young couples or couples can learn NFP, so on and so forth. And the conversation went about exactly what are the circumstances where the marital act is licit. And one of the things that Deacon Fred said was, well, there always has to be the chance of fertilization. There always has to be the chance, and you're not putting any barriers between that and the chance. Well, about that time, I could tell my wife was getting kind of anxious, and she raised her hand, and I was just really dreading the question that she was going to ask. I had no idea what she was going to ask. But keep in mind that all my peers are out there and their wives, and several clergy are in the room too, and we're all talking about this very tedious and difficult topic. And she says, well, here's the deal.
Here's the deal.
The thing about it is, that's what she said. The thing about it is, some of us, there is no chance that, like her, could ever get pregnant. She's gone through menopause, so on and so forth. And one of my buddies across the room said, well, come on, Eileen, haven't you heard of Abraham and Sarah?
Which, if you guys don't know the story, Sarah got pregnant when she was like 90 or
140 or
something.
something.
Yeah.
Old. 20 or 130. It was a gift from God. Don't you know the story about Abraham and Sarah? And Eileen looks at me and she says, well, he's no Abraham. And I know Sarah. So the question still remains, you know, and Deacon Fred answered it similar. Even people who have, like, they've gone past the age of procreation, it's still, because it's still unitive, and that chance, they're not putting the barrier in there. You know, people who have gone through menopause or beyond the age of pregnancy, as long as they're not consciously thwarting it, the possibility of fertilization, they're good to go, and it's still a praiseworthy thing, because it's still unitive, it's part of the marital act.
I guess think of this example.
But the rest of the year, guys would walk past me in the hallway and say, hey,
Abe Lincoln, because you're so tall.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Think of this, it's like when you guys had your wedding, right? Send out wedding invitations, right? And like there's some people, like, you know, your parents are gonna come, your siblings are gonna come, grandma's gonna come, right? Your cousin is, maybe they're gonna come, they're probably gonna come, right? Your second cousin, you're like, okay, well, it's like, if you send out the invitation to them and they don't come to the wedding, right? Or you sent them a letter that said, listen to me, I don't want you to come to my wedding, right? In both scenarios, you have the same result. They're not coming to the wedding, right? But they're two very different actions. One in which you're intentionally, aggressively disinviting them to your wedding, and one in which you're putting it out there, but you know they're probably not going to come, or even you know they're certainly not going to come. They live in Timbuktu, you know. It's like the same end. They don't come to the wedding, but in one of those ends, you aggressively kind of, I don't know, thwarted natural family ties and been a real jerk. Just couldn't imagine sending somebody a letter like that. But so it's like, even though it has the same result, there's still two kind of qualitatively different actions, if that makes sense. A ring that's not yours, I would say, don't send a letter like that before your wedding. Yeah.
If I'm understanding the basic principle is you're not supposed to go against things that are naturally occurring.
Yeah, and so that's where it's like, you don't want to get it confused with like law of nature naturally, because there are plenty of things that, like when we talk about speaking as a way of like communicating that, it's like, well, that's not natural in that like there's some sort of law of nature that compels you to say the truth. But it's, you don't want to go against things' essences. You don't want to use them in a way that's contrary to their nature, contrary to their essence.
Because I was curious, if somebody, for example, gets cancer, right, and death is a natural thing.
Yeah.
Would that be oh, you shouldn't get chemotherapy because?
Well, no. So you can. Or go ahead.
Anything that is extraordinary, you're not required to get anything that is extraordinary. And I've actually had this discussion. If chemotherapy, there's a very good chance that chemotherapy is going to cause extreme side effects, and you choose not to do that, that's not sinful. It's not a sin.
Well, I think he's asking, are you allowed to pursue medical treatment? Because death is
Absolutely
natural.
not.
Right, because what's in your nature, what's in the human nature is the desire to preserve your own life. Like that's part of your nature. That's like the most fundamental part of your nature is a desire for self-preservation. So in pursuing medical treatment, you're not thwarting your nature, you're upholding your nature, if that makes sense. So it's not just if something occurs in nature, then it's a good thing, we just gotta go along with it. It's, you have to look at the nature of the thing.
Did that answer your question?
So I guess using the word nature is where it gets confusing. So it's if your essence is for self-preservation, which is everybody's, it's one of the fundamental parts of being a rational creature, or a irrational creature for that matter, then you wouldn't be thwarting your nature by trying to preserve your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. I had a great video that I never finished watching before class that talked in part about something kind of like that. But now you'll never know because I didn't finish watching it. I don't know if it's good. But it's from John Green, the guy that wrote that paper sounds book. So writes philosophy videos in case you're interested. Very weird. All right. So all of this idea that you can use your nature or your reasoning to understand the good and the bad and what is something's nature and how you act in accord with it, all those things. It's that involves obviously a lot of discernment, it's a judgment of reason. And we make these judgments in order to recognize the moral quality of an act. So, like to Austin's point, if you don't know if something's good or bad, then you don't know how to make a moral decision in regards to it, which means we need to learn how to figure out if things are good or bad. And that's where conscience formation comes in, right? We read, I think it was in the Catechism, right? Deep within man, within his conscience, man discovers a law that he has not laid upon himself, right? It's in our conscience that we start to make these moral judgments. We start to say, what is good, what is bad, what is a thing's nature? And using that conscience is how we decide kind of which path to take, which means our conscience is pretty important, and obviously it's going to take a role in this conversation. The Catechism, I won't read the whole paragraph, but it says, a little bit down the road, that man has a right to act in conscience, right? So you have a right to act according to your conscience, which means if you have this understanding that something is right and someone forces you to go contrary to that, and they're forcing you to violate your conscience, that's a bad thing. But where there's a right, and this is important not just for this conversation, but really for everything that you'll ever do your whole life, where there is a right, there is always a corresponding duty. There's always a corresponding obligation. So you have the right to act according to your conscience, but then you have the duty to form your conscience well, because it's a bad thing to act according to a malformed conscience, if that makes sense. So it's like, if you sincerely believe in your heart of hearts that, I don't know, shooting people is great, it's like that's a bad thing because your conscience has been malformed. Like, it's important to have a well-formed conscience in order to have the right to act according to that conscience. So you don't get off scot-free, like, well, my conscience said it was fine, because you also have that obligation to be well-informed. So my conscience told me to isn't a good excuse for doing bad things, if that makes sense. So our consciences must be informed, our moral judgment enlightened. And in many cases, we can be responsible for not having a well-formed conscience. In some cases, we aren't responsible, or we aren't completely responsible for having an ill-formed conscience. So imagine if you grew up in a society where like theft was totally normal. Like it was encouraged, it wasn't punishable by law, it's like everybody did it. If you steal something really big and get away with it, like you're gonna get accolades. You guys ever play that Cheaters Monopoly game? It's like Monopoly. I mean, it is Monopoly, but it has all these different rules and you're allowed to cheat. And if you can cheat without getting caught, like you can do whatever you want. Like I played this with my dad once. He was the banker. And at the very end of the game, he just took all of the money out of the bank. And nobody caught him because we're all counting our money or whatever. And it's like, well, then he won because he had the money. And that's the rules, is if you can cheat and no one catches you, you get to do whatever you want. So if society were really like that, right, and your whole life you've been raised and everybody's stealing things left and right, and there's no consequences for it, well, you probably would think that stealing is okay. And that's not entirely your fault that you think that, right? Because, I mean, you do have right reason, and you set your mind to it, maybe you really could figure out, like, hey, stealing is wrong. But that's a lot to ask of a person, to just be able to completely buck all of society's rules and discern for themselves in this perfectly distilled way everything that's true about the world, right? That's a pretty heavy burden. And so there are ways in which people could have an ill-formed conscience and then make immoral decisions based on that ill-formed conscience. And they're either not responsible for it or they're not completely responsible for it, because whether it's society or some sort of authority figure or something has like led them to believe that the bad is the good and the good is the bad. Which is important for us, one, because it's like we have to realize like perhaps we're in a society where our consciences are being ill-formed and we should try to take stock of that and really kind of look at things soberly. But it also means that we have to be aware of the fact that we are giving example to people around us. So not only do our actions have a moral quality kind of in and of themselves for their own sake, but they also are shaping the moral conscience of the people around us. So it's like if I sit up here and, I don't know, start cursing like a sailor, right, which I am wont to do, what's that going to communicate to you guys? Okay, well, she's a faithful Catholic, and she comes and she teaches this class, and she goes to Mass, and yet she talks like a sailor. So it's probably fine to talk like a sailor, right? Because I've given you this example, and that impacts your understanding. not great for me to talk like that. It's not great for me to give people that example. And that's important for us to understand too. It's like making moral decisions and having a well-formed conscience is important, not only for our own sake, but also because of how it's going to lead us to impact the consciences of other people. Is that sort of responsibility? I guess first the distinction, the obligation to form a conscience well. Makes sense? Anybody have issues with that? I know. And when we talk about the 10 Commandments and stuff, like I said at the beginning, it's like these things can be hard to distill, especially in a very tumultuous society where there are a lot of people making moral claims about a lot of things. And that's why divine revelation is, that's the only reason, but it's why it's so handy. Because sometimes it's a lot to expect of somebody to perfectly know on the road. Just like with knowing that God exists, it's a lot to expect everyone to know the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas and all the arguments of Aristotle and all these things. It's like, average people just got a lot going on. So sometimes having someone just say it and be like, okay, yeah, that's true, it takes some of the burden off. But again, we're not completely alleviated of the obligation to try to figure these things out for ourselves. At least to try, you know what I mean? And then again, this idea that we can cause, it's called scandal, the idea that we can cause scandal to those around us, is a moral obligation that I think people don't take seriously enough. I'll give an example, and this has been in the news 100 times, so I'm sure I won't scandalize anybody. Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, right, is ostensibly Catholic, and yet she was very, very attractively pro-abortion, right? So it was a big deal, big news story. Her bishop said that you can't receive communion anymore because you're supposed to be Catholic, you're not supposed to want abortion, and yet you're advocating for it. And that's bad for you, but it's also bad because you're showing the whole world it's okay, you can be a good Catholic and still advocate for abortion. It's like you're a prominent public figure. Everybody looks at you, everybody knows that you're Catholic. You talk about being Catholic, and yet you're doing this thing that's going to confuse people. It's going to make people think that, oh, I can be a faithful Catholic and do this thing that the church says is bad. And because you're doing that prominently, people are going to start to conflate those things. And that's not good for your soul, but it's also bad because it's going to scandalize other people. And it's like, we might not all be like prominent politicians. The whole world might not be watching us, but your coworkers are watching you, your children are watching you, like the people around you, they're watching you, you know what I mean? And the ways in which you act give people the understanding that such and such action is good or such and such action is bad, and is going to form their consciences. So we want to be careful not to scandalize other people, because we are in part responsible for that.
Well, anyone that votes for the legalization of abortion, think about how many young people say, well, if it's legal, then it must be right.
Right, the law is a teacher, and that's part of why people are not entirely culpable for the things that they think are good, because the point of the laws in society are to help teach us what is good and what is bad. That's why we should have good laws. That's why not having good laws is bad, not just because obviously they're going to allow bad things, but because they're going to teach people that bad is good and good is bad. In the same way that, like, if you had a law that said you can't, I don't know, help orphans or something, and it's illegal to help orphans, it's like, well, people are going to start to think like helping orphans is bad. Yeah, it's probably a better example. Yeah, if it's criminal to say things that are true, then people are going to start to think.
It's absolutely, yes, and that's happening regularly around the world. People are being prosecuted for speaking truth. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
But it's bad.
Natural law tells us those certain things also are true. And our morality should not be twisted like that. People who twist it are very culpable. But go ahead.
You have this idea, one of the most famous quotes from Martin Luther Jr. is, an unjust law is no law at all, right? There's this idea in jurisprudence that when a nation, when a society develops their laws, what they should be doing is working on this natural law principle. They should make laws that are true and good and are going to encourage people to pursue truth and goodness. And when a law doesn't do those things, when a civil law is impelling you to act contrary to the natural law, which is to say the real law that's written on everybody's hearts, that you don't have an obligation to follow the civil law, right? So if the law says, black people can be slaves, like it's not immoral for you to be an abolitionist and try to thwart that system, right? because there's a superseding law, right, the natural law. But it's scandalous that the civil law would embrace something that is so contrary to the natural law, because what does it do? It teaches the people in society that this is okay, and it propagates that idea, because the law is the teacher. And in the same way that the law is a teacher, even if we don't have sort of the civil authority, it's like the ways in which we live our lives is going to be a teacher to the people around us. So again, it's important to form your conscience for your own sake, so that you're not doing good, or you're not doing evil, you're doing good. It's also important so that you're not representing that or misrepresenting what is good and evil to other people. So we're going to talk about the morality of human actions. So we have this idea that, we might have in our heads, like, okay, this is good, this is evil, this is something of nature, this is whatever. But then you have to actually put it into action when you do things. And then that's what we're talking about in morality. So it's not just knowing what's good and evil, but it's doing the good and avoiding the evil. So when it comes to evaluating the morality of human actions, there are 3 components, which if you guys are interested in this later, you should be interested in this later. It's 1750, that area of the catechism will break this down, how to evaluate the moral quality of an action. So the first question is, what is the object, or what is the action that you're going to do? Is it a good action, like, I don't know, feeding a hungry child? Is it a neutral action, like pushing a button? Or is it an intrinsically evil action, like kicking a baby in the face, right? So you can have actions that are going to be good, actions that are neutral, meaning it's something else is going to determine the quality of it. So pushing a button, right? If that button releases rose petals into the air, okay, that can be a good action, right? If that button, I don't know, sprays a bunch of bullets everywhere, that's probably a bad action, right? But the pushing the button part, the actual action, is neutral. I guess it depends on where you spray the bullets. If you're indiscriminately spraying bullets into a crowd of civilians, right? So the action, the pushing the button, technically is the same. So the pushing the button part is moral. It's the circumstances of this button is connected to a gun that's going to kill a bunch of civilians. That's the bad part. Or is it intrinsically evil? Is it something that's never going to be justified, like killing an innocent person? Okay. There's not going to be a situation in which killing an innocent human person is justified. There's not like circumstances. It's not a morally neutral thing like pressing a button. So the first quality, the first element is the object. What is the action? The second quality is the intention or the end in view. An intention can inspire many actions, and several intentions can inspire one action. Now, having a good intention is not enough. So if you have a good action that you're doing, you have a good intention, it's great. You have a neutral action that you're doing, you have a good intention, that's great. If you have an evil action that you're doing, you have a good intention, it's not good enough. Something being intrinsically evil, meaning it's wrong in every circumstance, isn't made okay just because you have a good intention. So, that old maxim, the ends justify the means, right? The end, the object that you have in sight is going to justify what you do to get there as long as you have this good object in sight or this good intention. No, it's a terrible idea. Don't ever follow that. Yeah.
Actually, you guys are a bit more removed from it than I am. I grew up with a father who was in active combat in World War II. And when talking about the dropping of the atomic bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, mostly civilians, in his mind, there was no doubt in his military mind that was morally appropriate, right? We look back on it now, hindsight's always 20/20, and it's not so clear cut. In fact, it leans more toward immoral because so many civilians were killed. However, there are all those other considerations, and so that was a perfect example of what President of the United States who made that final decision, those 2 final decisions. And there's no doubt in my mind that Harry Truman took these things into consideration. And certainly the people around him did this also. But my dad was convinced that it saved millions of lives by doing that and justifies the means.
Right, so
However,
that's the question, right? Does saving people justify killing
Murdering.
other innocent
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, then the question is posed, were they actually innocent? Were there any innocent? How many were innocent? How many were actually contributing to the war effort through, um, you know,
I'm gonna work with those children. I got into an argument with some guys at the coffee shop about this one, and they said, quote, "This is why women shouldn't go to war." I'm like, listen, Ed, I don't want to go to war. That's not why.
yeah. So anyway,
With my tiny lady brain, I guess I couldn't.
these
understand.
are tough decisions, and there's a greater responsibility for people in those kinds of roles to understand all of the things that go along with that. And these rules that we're coming up with are not Catholic specific or post-Vatican II specific, although they're certainly swayed by some of the decisions that are made in Vatican II, but are specific to mankind, and thus natural law. So it's not just a what if theoretical or hypothetical kinds of thing. This just happened massively. And we still have some responsibility. We have a responsibility as a nation. We have a responsibility as, I don't know, let's not get down that road. But still, those are big questions to ask.
And that's why we're here asking you to do it every time you make a single decision ever. Good luck ever doing this everything. No, okay, so the third element is the circumstances of the action. So the circumstances are not going to change the moral quality of the act, right? So if something is intrinsically evil, it's not going to become good just because of the circumstances. If something is intrinsically good, it's intrinsically good. But a loving God is not going to become evil just because of the circumstances. But the circumstances may increase the goodness or evilness of an act, or they may influence the responsibility you have in making that decision. So I think if I can come up with an example. If Kurt brings me a bowl of potato salad, what is the object of the act? What's the action? What's he doing? Giving me potato salad, right? What are Kurt's intentions? Okay, well,
Out of love.
Okay, so he loves me, he wants to give me potato salad. And what are the circumstances? He says she looks hungry, so I want to give her this potato salad, right? So we would say, okay, good action on Kurt's part. He's doing a neutral thing, maybe even a good thing, bringing me potato salad. He's doing it for a good reason, that he cares about me, wants me to be nourished, and there's no extenuating circumstances where we would think he's doing something bad by bringing me potato salad, right? Or if I tell you that I'm allergic to mustard, which I am, every potato salad under the sun has mustard in it, which is a shame for me because I really like potato salad.
So I didn't know that.
So Kurt doesn't know that. The
Unless it
circumstances are
says
such.
potato salad.
Well, but if you don't know that I'm allergic to it, right? So he doesn't. You buy the mustard potato salad because it's superior to every other potato salad. It tastes so good. I'm allergic to mustard because I ate too much of it, and then I got hives all over my face. If Kurt doesn't know that I'm allergic to potato salad and he doesn't tell me, hey, this is mustard, right? So I eat it. Well, what are the circumstances? Or kind of look at that the action through a different way. Now what's Kurt's done? He's brought me potato salad, yes, but he's also brought me something that I'm allergic to. He's feeding me food that I'm allergic to. The intention is still good, right? He's not meaning to do something like poison me, but he's doing it. But the circumstances are going to mitigate his responsibility. He's not responsible for poisoning me because he didn't know I was allergic to mustard, right? Or maybe he did know I was allergic to mustard, and then what are those circumstances? Now he does know, and now what was a morally neutral act has become evil because he's intentionally, poisoning me. But if he doesn't know, it's like the same action, giving me mustard he's gonna be lessened of his responsibility for not poisoning somebody because he doesn't know what he was doing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So can an intention, so is an intention able to tell whether an act is good or bad?
No, so it's a part of the equation, but an intention can't change something essentially, an intention can't change something from an evil act to a good act. I guess it probably could go the other way. If your intention is to poison someone and you give them cookies,
Or I give them
or you give them
potato
mustard,
salad.
yeah, it's like, well, now your intention is to poison them, right? You're using maybe the neutral. So I guess I don't think you could change something that's intrinsically good into something that's evil. But you can change it to neutral. I mean,
Wow, here's an extreme of that. I'm an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, and someone comes up who is gluten, whatever, allergic. I intentionally switch someone that is as good as it possibly can be. I switch from no gluten to a regular host, knowing that that person is going to be.
made very ill or
Yeah.
whatever. Right, so if you're doing it intentionally, right, now you've taken, I guess, yeah, so maybe you've taken the good act of distributing communion and you've done something bad with it.
But I haven't made.
You
the
might
action
even say-
itself evil. I haven't
Okay,
made the-
yeah, okay, so that's right, yeah, you haven't made the action, which is distributing communion. It's still the same action, yeah, but you're doing it with this evil intention of poisoning somebody, yeah.
Just to use the example that take us out. Say he knew, he forgot. I'll be honest, I never forget.
Yeah, so if you really forget, you're allergic to what?
I'm allergic, they forget all the time, yeah.
Is it
Weird.
because of the mustard?
No, it's
Because I
not.
can't eat pickles
Brine,
anyway,
preservative or something.
Yeah.
So let's say he knew you were allergic to this salad.
but he forgot,
But
right?
he forgot, maybe to your opinion, it was still morally neutral. or
It's gonna
morally neutral.
probably depend on why he forgot. If he
Yes.
forgot because he just really forgot,
Or
it's
I'm
like,
hungover,
yeah, if it's because he's like drunk and he's like, oh, you want this potato salad? It's like, okay, well,
yeah, or I'm drunk.
So then wouldn't it fall on your?
my conscience like to ask if there's mustard in it. Well, I'm just receiving a gift, kind of assuming that it might not be prudent for me to not ask. But yeah, it's like someone's presenting it to me like, hey, this is safe to eat. It's normal to presume that it's safe to eat.
I guess I'm more so just curious on his part of.
I think
you're.
If it really is accidental, yeah, you can't sin by accident. If it's truly an accident and you didn't kind of create the conditions for you.
Well,
I guess this is a good example. Drunkenness is a good example.
Yeah.
When you are drunk, you do all kinds of stupid things, right, that are not good.
Reason isn't good.
Yeah, and it's much more than that. It's gone. And you do a bunch of stupid stuff. Historically, what people would say is, you're not responsible to the same degree for doing that stupid stuff while you're drunk, as if you did it sober. Now, what you are responsible for is getting yourself in a situation where you can't use your right reasons. You're responsible for getting drunk. You're culpable for getting drunk, which led to you doing all these stupid things. You're not as responsible for doing all those stupid things. I mean, we even see that borne out in law, right? If you hit somebody with your car because you're drunk, obviously you're responsible for hitting them, but in a different way than if you saw them in the road and you're like, you know what, I really want to get my blood pumping, and you just sped off and hit them, right? They're, again, same action. You hit somebody with your car. The circumstances are different. In one, you're more responsible for it because you did it in cold blood. In one, you're less responsible for the act of hitting of them with your car, but you are responsible for putting yourself in a situation where you're impaired to begin with. So the responsibility falls primarily on a different action you did in the past.
Involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, right. And so it's like, so we see it borne out in law that you're still responsible, but because you didn't have access to the full use of your will. Like if you were sober, presumably you wouldn't have done that. But if you're a serial killer, you would have done it, right? So it's like, it's the same action, but the circumstances are different. But you're responsible both for what you do and the circumstances you put yourself in. So
Here's a situation.
Yeah.
Let's take a 61-year-old man who's grossly overweight, doesn't get enough sleep.
hypothetical, right?
And his watch tells him, high stress today has drained your battery. On days like this, try to take breaks and consider some light exercise or outdoor activities. Now it's time to wind down and relax before bedtime to help you sleep better. And I choose to ignore that. Oh, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, right.
And I choose to ignore that and I end up having a heart attack.
I mean, so the real question would be, how did you know that ignoring that was going to lead to a heart attack?
Directly to a heart attack, no. But I
Right.
ignored-
So you might be responsible in part, you might be partly culpable, but that's different than if your watch started flashing and said, sit down now or you will immediately die, and you knew it was telling the truth. Like those are two different, so you can be partially responsible for this. I'm going to send you a link to a video because I'm going to talk about double effect, but I'm not going to finish it because I have to go take my rectory photos. So I don't know how to use the internet. Okay. While that's loading. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to morality of human acts and evaluating the moral quality of an act is what's called the principle of double effect. Because in the real world, in most situations, it's not just like a one in and one out. You do this one thing and it has exactly one consequence. Many of the things that we do, we know are going to they're going to impact lots of things and they're going to have lots of consequences, right? So I don't know. I honestly can't think of anything at the moment. I'll get there in a second. But so I can do an action knowing it's going to have more than one end. If all those ends are good, easy peasy, I do the good action. If all those ends are bad, then I can foresee easy peasy. I don't do that thing, right? But what happens if I want to make a choice to do an action, and some of the ends are good, some of the ends are bad, and I'm like, well, what do I do here? What can I do something to try to achieve this good end if I know that something bad is going to come of it? And this brings into what's called the principle of double effect. I'm going to send you a video for you to. Do you want me to email it to you? The link? Yeah. So I'm going to walk through this for a second, and then you're going to get a fancy guy from the National Catholic Bioethics Center explaining it a lot better than I would. But so this is called the principle of double effect. The idea that we can choose an action that is either morally good or morally neutral, even if we know that it's going to result in something bad, if we're also and primarily choosing it so that it will result in something good. I'll let him get into the examples because they'll be a little bit. It's only 3 minutes. Riot until the video. Just kidding, rioting might be intrinsically evil and then it wouldn't be good for the good of it. I think so. You also could just like the principle of double effect in Catholic, and it's like so okay, this guy's going to elucidate it a little bit better, but essentially it's the idea is the intention. We can't intend the evil effect of, so say we know it's going to have one good effect, one bad effect. We can't intend the evil effect. It has to be a regrettable outcome and not the thing we're pursuing. The causality, so the bad effect may be the consequence of a morally good or neutral act, but not vice versa, which means I can't do an evil thing to get a good thing, but I can do a good thing even knowing an evil might result of it. National Catholic Bioethics Center. Oh, sorry, into YouTube. Go to YouTube first. It's www.youtube.com.
No, I know, but these are ridiculous. So.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Yeah, that one. Oh, right over there.
That one
With
right
the
down
down.
This.
Down. The lady in the hospital there. NCPC. I'll just let this guy tell you. He's better at this than I am. This is his whole job. I think I told you about them last week, that if you ever have questions about bioethics, the National Catholic Bioethics Center is a really great resource.
We want to do the right thing, and as we're actually doing the right thing, something bad can also happen. What would be an example of this? Well, for example, we respect individual human life from the moment of conception, and in no way will we violate it. But imagine that a pregnant woman has come to her physician, and he's discovered that she has uterine cancer of the uterus of the womb. And if this cancer is not removed, she's going to die. And if the cancer is removed, the baby's going to die. What can we do? We're in a dilemma. And the church can help provide guidance in difficult situations like this through something called the moral principle of double effect. And it's brought into play when we're in a situation that no matter what we do, it's going to have a good effect and a bad effect. And so the question posed is, can I still go ahead and perform this action, removing the cancer's uterus? That's a good effect. If I see it will also have the bad effect of the loss of the life of the baby. And the answer to that question is yes, the 4 conditions are met. First of all, the act itself has to be good. Secondly, the only thing we can intend is a good effect, not the bad. Thirdly, the good has to come about on its own and has to precede the evil effect, because otherwise we'd be saying that you need evil to achieve good, and you can't do that. And finally, there has to be a proportionate reason for doing it. Now, how would we apply this situation to this principle, a very tragic situation of a pregnant woman with uterus cancer? Well, first of all, we can remove the uterus because that's removing the cancer, the pathology. All we want to do, our only intention is to remove the pathology. It's not to lead to the death of the child. We foresee and anticipate that the child will die, but that is not what we are intending. And thirdly, the good of removing the cancerous uterus isn't brought about by the death of the child. It's the good act of removing the cancer that results unintentionally, but in a foreseen way, in the death of the child. And the final condition here is that there's a proportionate greater reason for doing this. We're dealing with two lives here. And that therefore, if there's no other way of resolving this very sad and tragic situation, then one may go ahead and remove the cancerous uterus, even though one might foresee the death of the child. This is just one example of the sort of moral guidance that can be provided to us by the Catholic Church through its own tradition and its own millennium, actually, reflecting on these kinds of tough decisions. And I hope that an articulation of this principle of double effect might help you in some of the decisions you might have to make in the provision of health care for yourselves or for a loved one. Remember, the Catholic Church is concerned above all for the good of each individual human person, for their dignity, and for the sacredness of innocent human life. Thank you.
On that note, I gotta go take my pictures.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, I don't even remember there being music when I listened to it, so I don't know that.
it's frustrating, it's so frustrating. I've had great videos that they got, well, the bishops appeal. Okay, not the vendor. The bishops.
It's the worst every year.
Yeah, okay, so let's move on to something else.
Goodbye, friends. Good luck.
Thanks. So we've got 16 minutes left of class, but it's 31-minute video. So I want to preface this with, you're more than welcome. If you do not want to watch this video, it's absolutely inspirational, and it's sort of related to the 4 final things that Tony talked about. So certainly death, judgment, heaven, and hell. It touches on all 4 of those. So I will not be offended in any way, shape, or form if you get up at 7 o'clock and leave. Okay, just feel free to do so if you don't want to continue to watch it. I'm here till 8 because I have pictures, family pictures anyway. So I'm going to stick around. So again, the lead up to this guy was one of the many characters in this movie, in this documentary. He was he came up with the research of this orthopedic surgeon who wrote this book and wrote this study and published it with the American Medical Association. And now this is a follow-up interview to the video, to the big video, and then he wrote the book. But basically, he and his wife, this guy was at the time a very successful professor who was tenured at age 26, was department chair at age 30, I believe it was age 30, of the University of the United States. I can't remember which one, something in Kentucky. And he was kind of at the top of his secular life, his career for sure. But he was not a nice person, and he'll tell you that in the beginning. And he was traveling in France with his wife, at least, maybe his family, but I think it was just his wife. And he had this attack, not in a physical, an attack in his digestive system. And we'll take it from there. And this is his experience.
My faith was materialism. What I believed, and all of my PhD friends and all of my friends believe, that if you can't measure it, see it, weigh it, count it, it simply doesn't exist. So when I was dying, people asked me if I prayed. I was like, I'm trying to explain to you, like, the last thing in the world I would have done was pray. I would have sooner jumped off the Eiffel Tower than pray. What an absolutely silly notion. I asked for morphine. I asked for a doctor, because the pain of the hole in my duodenum which was leaking hydrochloric acid and other delightful digestive juices. I was dissolving myself. I was digesting myself on the inside. And if you want to know what that feels like, get a red hot coal out of the fire and stick it inside your gut. I'd seen 2 doctors in emergency, and they were very nice, but they didn't do anything. They just sent me over to surgery. They told me I had an hour to live. That's what they told me. And I would be having surgery right away. So they sent me to surgery, and unbeknownst to them, I'm sure there wasn't anybody to do the surgery. So that's why I didn't get any meds. You know, people tell me, well, the reason why you had your near-death experience was because of all the narcotics you've been doing. I'm like, I begged for anything and I was given nothing for 10 hours. Nothing. What about nothing don't you understand? When the nurse came in and said that they were unable to locate a doctor, that's when I told my wife, I said, tell my parents that I love them. And I said goodbye, tell my kids.